Hi, everyone. It's V. Spehar, the Director of Impact here at the James Beard Foundation. So excited to bring you our panelists today for the State of Food Journalism. As always, we're doing these every day at 2 p.m. We've got a lineup that gets issued every Friday. You can find out more about our webinars at jamesbeard.org/relief. You'll also be able to there read about what's happening with things like the stimulus bill, addendums, regulations that are being added, ways that us and other organizations are fighting to be open for good and to help revitalize the hospitality industry. You also find some fun stories about what's working for people out there and ways that they're just making do in their own local neighborhoods that may be of use to you and the folks that you're trying to take care of too. So I want to give our standard disclaimer, which is what's working for our friends today may not be working or legal in your state. I don't know if we'll get into any illegal things on this particular call, but just in case, you can't control them. You don't know. So just really treat this as a peer-to-peer friendly conversation. The solutions and ideas that we may come up with today might not be something that works for you. They may be something that works for you. We're going to keep having these conversations. And we want it to be a really interactive conversation. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily, who's going to tell you how you can interact with us today on the webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Welcome back. Like all of our webinars, this one is going to be recorded, so we'll send out a link to that recording after the program wraps. If you want to catch up on some of our other webinars that we've done, all the recordings are available at jamesbeard.org/industry-relief-webinars. We are going to save all of the questions for the end, but we know that something might pop into your head, so as it comes up, just feel free to submit it through the questions function in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will send those through and try to get to everybody's questions. If you're having technical difficulties, you can't hear, the video spotty. I know yesterday we had some audio problems, but we're doing our best to troubleshoot those today. But let us know if you can't hear something, because that especially, it might be a bigger problem, and we can help you out with that. And you can do that using the questions function or the chat function.
Great, thanks, Emily. So what we're going to do is just have everyone introduce themselves a little bit for folks who may not be familiar with your work, starting with Jamila. Tell me a little bit about where you're dialing in from today and what you've been up to.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be with all of you. I'm Jamila Robinson. I'm the food editor for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I am also the vice chair of the James Beard Foundation Journalism Committee. I'm dialing in from my house in DC. I am kind of splitting my time. My quarantine is here in DC, as I was in the midst of looking for a place to live to move to Philly. Life gets interrupted by coronavirus. But I'm happy to be here with all of you.
Great, thanks, Jamila. And Kat, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am Kat Kinsman. I'm senior editor at Food and Wine, host of the Communal Table podcast. And I love it. 1,000 years ago, I was the vice chair of that same committee, and I cannot imagine it in better hands. And I'm so proud of what you're doing with the journalism committee. I founded Chefs with Issues, which I think we'll talk about a little bit at the end. That is a conduit for folks in the restaurant in the hospitality industry to talk about mental health issues, bust that stigma, and find some resources to help themselves and each other.
Thank you, Kat. And Stef, tell us a little bit about where you're calling in from today and what you've been working on.
Yeah, I'm Stef Ferrari. I am senior editor for Life and Time. I am also an author and a producer on the documentary series The Migrant Kitchen, which explores the influence of immigrant culture on cuisine. And I'm calling from Connecticut because this is where I was detoured to on my way back to my Brooklyn home on March 16th, which is a day I think that will forever live in infamy in this business. But yeah, I am very, very honored to be here and really grateful and super excited to have this conversation because I think it's very meaningful, especially right now.
Thanks, Stef. And fun fact about Stef, we grew up and went to high school together about 3 miles apart. We now live in Brooklyn about 3 miles apart. So, just can't shake me, buddy. So I want to talk I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future, and sort of how this is all really shaken up, food journalism and media in particular. One of the questions that we had that was so predominant before this, when we were surveying the audience, was a couple of years ago, Yelp, bloggers, Instagram influencers, they were really changing the landscape of where food journalism sat, something that was, really esteemed and revered, and sort of you read about it like what Frank Bruni is doing or Gail Green, and it felt really unattainable, became this like, could be very pedestrian, anybody could technically be a food journalist on Yelp, right? Now that all those restaurants are closed, and we can't get that unicorn bagel picture, and we can't leave our reviews and our thoughts, how do you see this either helping or hurting the state of food journalism as it is today? Maybe start with Jamila.
Sure. I love this question because the idea that food journalism was kind of democratized. But what I really believe is that local journalism food journalism is local journalism, and that there's enough for everybody. The bloggers, the Yelpers, they were just adding to the conversation and adding more voices to a part of the industry that had been somewhat closed to a lot of people. And that really opened it up. And I think now, without the restaurants being there, it goes to show the beauty and the skill that is required for food criticism. It's a craft, and it also shows that we need more voices. I think one of the things that we had been seeing is that we needed more critics of color. We needed more critics who were going into neighborhoods that they had never been to, or thinking more about less about fine dining and more about your Korean restaurants, your Chinatowns, places that were filled up with South Asian restaurants. And so we are now seeing the power of local journalism and the power of the critics, of being able to add more voices and more ideas to the conversation. We need the Yelpers. We need the Yelpers to help keep people honest, to help the folks who have been longtime critics, and being able to look at, what is our system, and have we built systems that keep people out? And that was the beauty. But there's room for everybody. We need the bloggers, we need the Yelpers, we need the local critics, and to work together because it is a community and it is a food system.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that same point, as the restaurants in cities are going to be reopening, we're all, major city gals here. We're from New York or Philly or DC. And that was sort of where the centralized big resources were, right? And now, as you're going to see places like smaller towns or rural communities open first, Kat, I'm curious to know what you think about the opportunity for those small town bloggers who will be the only ones who can essentially go to a restaurant straight off, getting more publication.
Yeah, and I want to get a tiny bit more granular too, because we were talking about Yelp as a force, that has really affected restaurant criticism. I've always really appreciated the food bloggers as well, the people who are cooking at home, because I think now more than ever we've always needed them to show us recipes that maybe a lot of food publications thought they thought they were more highfalutin than that before. And food bloggers have always represented how people actually eat at home. And I think more and more, people are turning to those sources for those recipes that are about feeding your family, that are about comfort and pleasure and working with what's around you. And I think we're at a point where their value is being shown more than ever before, and there's no barrier to entry there also. And I've always so thoroughly appreciated that, and finding the voices of people who are bloggers, because there's no barrier to entry there. I mean, there are various tricks about getting your stuff to actually sort of float up to the top and in front of someone who can pay you to do that. Yeah. I've some of my favorite writers are people who, I caught wind of their blog and I've been like, hey, I really like this thing. Maybe you want to pitch me about something. And there's a tremendous wealth and diversity of voices there. But to your point about going to the restaurants, like, God, yes, we will absolutely need those voices and those people who, who have really risen to the top, maybe in their particular cities, because, as we've all seen on Yelp, some people just have an axe to grind and they're really mad if they weren't treated with kid gloves or whatever it is. Or don't you say I'm an elite Yelper or whatever it is? But frankly, the painful point is that so many of these local publications aren't going to have the money to spend on this, and they're going to be more and more reliant on those other voices. So, it always breaks my heart when people are told somehow that they're not a real writer, that they're not a real whatever, because they have a blog, because they have whatever. If you write, you're a writer, and you don't need somebody else's validation for that. I came about it in a weird backdoor kind of way. My master's degree is in metalsmithing. I have, I'm sure in some people's eyes, no right to be here. Maybe this is a place where we get to level the playing field, and right flies out the freaking window, and it should have done that a long time ago.
I guess just to underscore, a blog is a platform. It's a platform for writers.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steph, we were talking earlier about the responsibility of food journalism now more than ever, as people are, glued to their television sets and to their Instagram and to what content is just flowing so quickly at us. What do you think this time can be used as a part of to spread the message of like the cost of food and the cost of what people maybe didn't see in the restaurant industry before?
Yeah, and I think this dovetails with the conversation about Yelp and blogging in general, because I think that those are necessary platforms. But I think that one thing that they have done is kind of underscore the importance of publications who have journalistic resources to go out and actually tell stories that are a little bit more nuanced about the industry, or about the issues the industry faces. And for me right now, I see this as a really important opportunity. One thing I keep seeing and having conversations with people outside the restaurant and the food industry, and they're looking at this crisis that we're in right now, and they're saying, well, these places were obviously mismanaged, or why is the restaurant business falling apart like this? And what I think is really stark a lot of times is that the average diner has no idea what the cost of food is, and I don't just mean the piece of chicken. I'm talking about the cost of food from a financial standpoint, from an economic standpoint, an environmental standpoint, from a human standpoint. And over the years, that piece of chicken or that dish, that's $23 on the menu or $25 on the menu. Over the years, the cost of running a restaurant or an establishment has continued to exponentially increase, and the price of that dish is not. So we've entered a situation where we have, a group of people that barely pay themselves, that workers that are, hanging on by a thread, and these restaurants, even the ones that have been open for 10 years that look incredibly successful from the street because they're packed, they're still running a week-to-week, situation. So I think that the difference between the Yelpers and the blogs, if we look at publications, especially going forward, I think there's a real responsibility of food journalism to educate consumers, because chefs and restaurant people, they don't have the time to do that, and also no one wants to go to a restaurant and be preached at about what their food costs. Our job to let people know that this is an extremely costly endeavor. Most people do it for love, because no one is going home at the end of the day. Even the cover of the fancy magazine, that chef, I bet you is still struggling at the end of the day. So I think it's really our responsibility to make sure that people understand what this business goes through, so that when we come out the other side of this, and we will, it's with an industry that can maybe take care of itself a little bit better, and its people. And we as a community of diners support that and do it in earnest.
Yeah, absolutely. We did an interview with Facebook a few weeks ago, and they said the number one thing in their polls and in their algorithms that have been revealed is that the first thing they want to do is go out to dinner. And that's amazing, right? Like, we love that. We want that so badly. And I'm like, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? And how much more valuable would that experience be to you? And is this the chance that we have to reset? A lot of what we're seeing out there now. We spent the last 10 years essentially achieving even small levels of gender or racial parity in what types of cuisine people were willing to seek out and eat, what types of articles we wanted to read about, what kind of chefs we wanted to read about. How are you guys seeing even the small strides that we made in gender and racial parity slip during this time? And anybody can.
I think that again, I think that that's definitely a lot of the communication within this crisis has fallen on the shoulders of big names, which is great. That tends to be a very specific type of person. And I think that, again, going back to the responsibility of journalists, we really need to seek out those people that are not given a voice typically. And we were talking earlier a little bit about the idea of pitching and finding stories. And a lot of times, because we're so under-resourced and understaffed a lot of times, and we're constantly looking for those stories, the role of hospitality public relations comes in, and we're often pitched stories by a certain group of people that can afford to have a publicist. And that considerably narrows the pool. So I think that, again, going back to responsibility, we have to work with those people, and we have to work with what we're pitched. But I think it's our job to dig deeper and to go outside of those channels, the ones that are filling our inbox. It's very low-hanging fruit to say, yes, we'll write about that. Perfect. Send me the information. It's a lot harder to go digging for the people that don't have a publicist, or that, they're a porter, or, those stories need to be told too. Those stories are the human stories that are part of the 11 million workers in the industry. And those stories need to be contextualized.
And Jamila, I know you were saying to me before that one of the most insidious things happening during the shutdown is the solidification of the bubble that you're within. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. I mean, the challenge that I've posed to not only my team, but just people more broadly, is to think about your social settings. I mean, quarantine has caused us to go into what is familiar, what is comfortable. And we all knew from food journalism, it's overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly straight. We have to get out of that bubble and talk to other people. I mean, it's really easy to call the guy that you've been calling for 20 years and say, hey, how do you feel about the Beard Foundation's impact survey, and easy to get a reaction for them. It's a much more of a challenge to lift up and call a Davita Davison in Detroit, or to call Soleil Ho in San Francisco, and to be sure that we talk to people in our communities who we normally don't talk to. I mean, the food community is a community, and one challenge I always have for people is to tell stories about communities you don't live in. That's a big challenge for people, because we are a food community. So we like to talk to ourselves like everybody else. But if you look at your social feed and you see that your social feed only has a certain kind of person in it, then you have to lift up and step out in order to find those stories. I know, as a Black woman, I am experiencing quarantine completely differently than a lot of people. I have, I live in a neighborhood that is gentrified, but is not a food desert. That is high income and low income. And the food stories that are here are so compelling because people can get to the grocery store and everything's full and the supply chain is absolutely fine. But there are also a lot of people who are poor, who are on SNAP benefits, and they can't have their food delivered. And so we have to be able to find those stories and tell stories about all of those people. Just to piggyback on something Steph said, which I think is so important, we look at the pitches, and the pitches are easy. And journalists right now, we are working 16, 20-hour days. I've never been busier. And so we need for folks to, when they're pitching us, and to think about the stories that they want to present to us. Is it diverse? Is it equitable? Is it inclusive? Are you sending me a pitch where everybody's white? And I'm probably going to send it back to you and say, why is everybody white? And and because I want an answer to that question. And it gives them the opportunity to step back and go, wait a minute, I need to think about my pitching. I need to think about the stories that I'm presenting. I need to think about the sources that I want to provide for you. Philadelphia, 1 in 5 people are food insecure. So asking me to, showing me luxury things to show to my audiences may not be the right step. So being very aware of how they're pitching. And I think the journalists, we have to be able to always lift up and think about whether or not people who don't live in our households and our communities will react to these stories the same way. And if the answer to that is no, we need to go and talk to them and get them to talk and to tell us different stories.
Yeah, and Kat, I want to loop you in here because earlier you were telling me, topic switches and updating, what's useful to be pitching now has changed. We did a cookbook seminar a little while, maybe like a week ago, and the women there were saying, you must have a headshot, you must have your recipe ready, you must have, your boilerplate ready. What should people have ready when they're pitching you?
So
other than a story that's compelling and diverse.
Right. I think it's important to, first of all, this has always been the case, to research the publication before you pitch to it. We don't run outside recipes. We just don't. We have particular contributors who we use for food and wine cooks, and they're home chefs, cookbook writers, et cetera. We're expanding our pool of that because, that's content that our readers have really been responding to. But otherwise, we do home cooking, but we can't, everything has to be vetted through our test kitchen and stuff. So if you're pitching me that particular thing, it's not going to fly. I'm looking to be surprised. I'm looking to see that you went a level deeper. I'm not afraid. I feel like there's been a recalibration of food journalism slowly over the last few years, especially where it used to be focused on just like what looks pretty, what seems pretty. It's all just loveliness on a plate. It's all very it's very aspirational. And that wasn't working for me. And that was not working for a whole lot of people. And and I've been really heartened to find that people are not afraid to hear about other people's pain and the actual human, like you were saying, the cost of the food, the actual human toll of what people are going through. So, if you can come to me and show that you have gone a level deeper, you're not just like, oh, hey, I had the opportunity for this, to talk to this chef, like, I don't have a problem getting to any chef. Like, that's the thing, is like, if you're teaching somebody at a publication, like, especially right now, they're happy to call you. They're really but like, if you figured out who their porter is, who their line cook is, who their other person is, it's actually maybe a little bit even easier to find than ever, because you can usually go to an Instagram or something, and a lot of people are putting up like staff portraits. You can figure out who works where and go down those rabbit holes and figure out some of those people. If you can help tell their story without being exploitative about it, because I also this is really important to me, that while we're doing all of this stuff and we're showing the human toll of it, we're not making anybody into a poster child. We're not making anybody have to feel like they need to be embarrassed for asking for help. Like, right. I think it's really good that a lot of these places that have turned into food kitchens and everything are making sure that journalists aren't taking pictures of people's faces, because anybody could be in this situation. I don't care who the hell you are, like whatever you're feeling, like anybody could be food insecure or shelter insecure at any particular time. But if you can, show me that you approach this and you did some of your homework, and you have some compassion, and you aren't showing me something that is kind of luxury right now. I know that's weird because I work technically in the luxury group of my publication, but I published a story last night about my own anxiety around food insecurity. So I think the door's a little more open than usual right now. So homework and heart are just really, really important to me right now.
Yeah, Steph, anything to add on that topic?
I think how you just closed it, homework and heart, that's brilliant. And I think that's a really beautiful way to describe it. I think that my constant conversation when it comes to pitching is, I want to know who the characters are. I want to know what the story is, but also if you're pitching me the restaurant that you love down the street, because you love their, their bagels. Let's talk about, let's get deeper than that. Where did that come from, and who are the people that are being affected on the outside of that chain too? Where are they getting their flour? Who are the farmers? And I'm not saying that every story has to include all of those characters, but you may find something more pivotal and more interesting and more, frankly, more relevant than a good bagel if you dig a little bit deeper. And I think that people are actually very hungry for that content. And I think, pardon the pun, but I think that for a long time, it really has been food journalism has been, I think food journalism is actually kind of a new-ish term. Like there was always food criticism and there was food writing. And it was a very, celebratory and, luxurious, which is wonderful, and it's escapist, and it's still something we need. But I think journalism in the realm of food, especially now, is so it's becoming obvious how important that it is, especially when you look at the fact that this crisis has pointed out, to many people that this is, the restaurant industry alone is 4% of the GDP, and that's not to say anything of the, of the farmers and the linen truck drivers and the people that print menus. I mean, this is an industry that, and especially if you start looking at that bagel through that lens, you can start to understand that there's a web, or there's history, or there are all these different components. You can talk about culturally. I mean, I think food, what I love about writing about food is that it's how I learn the world. It's how I understand culture. It's how, it is the great equalizer. And when we are in a political climate, when, otherness is such an issue, food is the connector. And we learned that so intensively during the Migrant Kitchen. Every episode is a different culture. And in every episode, I can guarantee you, we had a conversation where someone would say, well, if you're Mexican, you just really want to feed people. If you're Palestinian, you just really want to feed people. If you're Indian, you just, and it was just so funny to us, because we're like, this is the common denominator. We're all the same. And I think that we can, as food journalists, we have the ability to demonstrate that with every story. And like, I get chills just thinking about that, because I think that that's the power of food journalism.
Yeah, as a sort of digging a little bit deeper into that, we talked earlier about getting these front of house stories. For a long time now, there's been criticism of the food community for fetishizing chefs and putting up these pictures of the farmer so stoic in the field when, the rate of farmer suicide is so high, and they're also really struggling to like put food on their own tables. And, this sort of painting this beautiful, beautiful picture of these chefs and what they are and what they're not, and farmers. And in between, we're losing the stories of, the morning prep chef and the waiter in training, and the guy who's the bar back and just wants to be a bartender so bad, or the hosts and the menu printers and all of the people that come into this organization to make this industry, right? Jamila, what do you think about how people can start, if they have not ever before, they can start to change gears to put a light on folks who hadn't had a light on them before?
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about are folks who are in the front of the house. Your hostess probably can't pivot to Instagram and do home cooking on Instagram. Your bar manager, maybe the mixologist could do some classes, but some of those things that we're just missing, and we have to again find the stories about people. Food writing is all about people. If you care about food, you probably care about people. And so we have to be able to show other parts of their lives and find out what they're doing, what their hopes and dreams are, how students who are in classes that are disrupted now. There are all of these lines of stories that capture the incredible breadth of the food section. The real estate managers, there are a lot of people who their jobs and their lives and their livelihoods are in limbo now. So we have to think about, the immigration status of people. I just think if you're writing about food and you aren't writing about climate, and you aren't writing about business, and you aren't writing about supply chain, you aren't writing about the environment and all of these other issues, there are a lot of people, we can continue to lionize the chefs, but there is so much invisible work that goes behind a restaurant and behind the food section, the test kitchen directors at Food and Wine that make things look, wonderful and beautiful, or the people who are writing these recipes, these step-by-steps to make it easy for, for home cooking to become, for us to transition so easily to home cooking. The people who put up the websites, there are so many people in the system that we don't think about because they aren't visible to us. So it gives us an opportunity to be more explicit, back to what Stef was saying, more explicit and more direct about how our food system works, who's doing it, and making sure that their work is not invisible. We know that chefs and, they have an executive chef and a sous and a line and a pastry, executive pastry, and all of it. We've just gotten to the point where we started talking to pastry chefs going, oh yeah, we should be nominating them for awards, largely because they're women, and we forget about them because because we participate in the system too. But it is our cultural currency, and it will continue to be our cultural currency, taking a line from Ken Severson at the New York Times, who likes to say that. It will continue to be the art form that we all participate in, but we have to be able to, we go back and we see all the steps in between. We can't just put a recipe together and just stuck it in the oven. There are all of the intricacies that happen. And so all of those intricacies are people, and they can all have stories behind them.
So what I'm hearing is that maybe this, at least a major piece of the food journalism journey and where we're going to be going after this, and even now, is not just talking about food, critiquing food or listing food or making food. It's going to be life through the lens of food. Does that sound like what you guys are feeling too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had to make a big pivot over the past few years because I have a lot of gut issues that really put so many foods off the menu for me. And I was at first mortified to talk about it because I'm ostensibly a food writer who couldn't eat most food, basically couldn't go to restaurants for a year or two. And Jamila saw me through this whole thing. We became kind of like, illness buddies.
Illness buddies.
Yeah, and she was an incredible support and solidarity throughout all of that. But I also found that kind of the more of the humanity that I showed of that, the kind of the more resonant my work could be. So I had to make a pretty hard pivot from food to people. And people were asking me, like, once they started being more public about the fact that I couldn't really eat a whole lot of these foods, they were like, well, how are you going to do your job? And I'm like, it's always, when I think about it, really the stories that I've always really cared about are about the humans who are actually part of this system. And that's, and I really haven't had pushback from that. People want to hear these stories. They want to hear the voices amplified. And it just makes you love your food more once you know all the hands that go into it. I do also want to note during all of this that so many of us are, working for publications that are going through pretty, budget cuts and are in a state of whatever. Even if someone can't take your story right now, building that relationship is a really huge thing to do right now. Like, I've had to say to some people, like, I can't, I don't really have the budget for that right now. I can't do it, but your idea is great. And, maybe I'll be able to help them place it somewhere else that can do that if I think it's good, but also keep talking to me, let me know who you are, what you give a damn about. That's a question I ask a lot of writers. They'll say, like, what are you looking for? I'm like, tell me who you are. Tell me what stories that I don't know that you can tell me, and don't pitch me what you think I want to hear by virtue of, like, where I happen to work, what image you have of that. Tell me who you like. I always say the story only you can tell, because it's a perspective that I didn't even know existed. And even if, like, I always say to people also, like, a topic isn't a story. You can say, like, I like ham. Like, okay, so what about ham? Like,
tell me about it.
Ham. It's like, what is that? And, you know, I think the more granular, and I keep coming back to that word, like human, that you can possibly be, and think of this as not just one story, but a long-term relationship with, you know, both an editor and your subject. Like, you're always going to have something interesting, and I'll always be interested in you, even if I can't, like, use your story right now.
Yeah, and that's something that we say about the James Beard Awards too, right? When the chef says, I want to win an award, we're like, okay, show me what you cook, show me who you are, because wanting to win an award or wanting to get published isn't necessarily going to do it. It's going to be that unique thing that you show. And I think it's such a great treat to everyone, in a sense, that you guys are all like, yeah, come get to know me. I'm at my house. I'm here on the house doing my things. And the world really, if there's one silver lining to the quarantine, right, it's the fact that people have become so accessible and so deeply interested in other people and wanting to get to know them, and taking the time to hear their stories, or, you know, not having to go with what the big publicists say or what's on trend, because everything's up in the air. So it's sort of like a nice equalizer. One thing that folks are asking several times in the questions here is, maybe you are, maybe you like, you know, a certain topic and you like to write about it, but you're not trained in it necessarily. Like, maybe you're not a great speller, or grammatically right, or sentence structure isn't your forte. Like your friend Vita Spear, not such a great reader writer. What tools can we, good talker, not a good reader writer, what tools can people, or classes can people be taking right now to sort of dial up their offering?
I can start with that. I mean, to be a better writer, you have to read more. It's the best thing that you can do is figuring out, you know, to figure out your voice, you have to figure out what you do, you know, not only what you don't like, but what moves you. I don't think you have to go to a particular school. I don't think it really matters where you go to school. I think what matters is having people around you who are who care about your work, and who will help you get better. I think it's super duper important to take advice from people who are invested in your success, and that's it, which means they are going to help your writing get better, or they will tell you that they will help you lift up or become or get deeper. You know, one of the things that makes Kat such a good editor is that she will say, you know, go wider and deeper with this one topic. And those are the things that are going to make you get better. And building relationships, just to piggyback on a couple of other things that were said, I don't think it's a matter of school, but there are workshops. Deborah First is doing a workshop for food writers. Portia Wilson has been doing some workshops of food writers with Clay Williams, the photographer, works for the James Beard Foundation. Scan your Instagram and find people who you like. They're like, just, you know, what Vitus was saying, there's so many people right now who are like being accessible and giving the gifts of their knowledge and their editing, and they're extraordinarily accessible. So read more, connect with people, have people who are invested in your success, and have a good mentor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything?
I would definitely agree with all of that. And you know, the read more, you know, I can't tell you, it's the first thing that's clear when you get a pitch that's from someone who doesn't actually do a lot of reading, or do a lot of journalistic reading or magazine reading or whatever the publication is. It's very clear. I think that's A1. But I think, you know, I have personally had a lot of imposter syndrome over the years as a writer. You know, I didn't go to school for writing. I didn't, you know, I've never taken a formal class in writing. I have never ever had any of those resources, and I haven't sought them, you know, in my professional career either. I think that being a good writer is about reading a lot, practicing, and journalism especially is about, it's not about asking questions as much as it's about listening, and paying attention not only to the people that you're talking with and being engaged and hearing things to say, but listening to everything that goes on around you, and starting to hone your instincts on what is interesting, what is a story, and ask questions. And just when you're with someone, anyone who's willing to talk to you is donating their time to you. You know, whether that's a subject or a colleague or a mentor, do them the service of listening, and be curious. That is, I think, above all in this business, being curious and trying to, someone tells you something about going back to the bagel. It's like, okay, ask the question. Where did this come from? Where did bagels come from? How did this place get here? What was this place for? Ask all the questions, but listen to the answers, and listen when people give you their time.
That is great advice, Steph. Listen to the answers.
If I can piggyback on that, I think the single best thing that people can learn to do right now is be good interviewers. It will serve you so well. And the single best piece of interview advice that I ever got was from a woman named Lisa Townsend Rogers, who remains a dear, dear friend. And she was pretty much the first person to, when I was the art director back at City Search in the mid-90s, said like, hey, I think, could you write up this concert for me? And I was like, oh my God, she thinks I'm a writer, because I, slid in through the back door of all of this. And she told me, embrace your chumpitude. I'm like, that's so good. You feel like an ass when you're interviewing people a lot of times, especially if it's like somebody you're really impressed by, or somebody who has a very different life experience than you. Whatever it is, just accept the fact that you're going to feel like a tool, like while you're doing it. Just embrace that discomfort, make room for them to talk. You don't have to fill up the awkward silences. Record yourself while you're doing it, like make sure that they do it. Interview your friends if you possibly can, and just work through those skills, work through that discomfort. Everyone hates hearing their own voice on tape, but like go put yourself through the pain of a transcription. It is a really, truly amazing thing, because like that's actually my least favorite part about there are various bad parts of journalism, but like transcribing is really very, very terrible. But like really, like everybody has a story to tell. And a thing that I like to do, as a person who lives in New York City and who also travels a lot, I always talk to cab drivers. I ask cab drivers about where they would go eat. And it's a muscle I can't turn off. And you find out so much about them, about the city, about what they care about. But just like ask people about themselves and let them talk, and you'll find yourself just like building those muscles. And don't be afraid to show a little, some vulnerability in yourself, because that opens the door for, people to be able to share about themselves as well. And it's really just about that human connection and, and being so, if somebody makes you feel awkward or you make yourself feel awkward, whatever, like nobody died of that. It's fine.
Right.
Just embrace it. And also be willing to, if you screwed up, stand in that pain and listen to what that person is telling you. If you ask them a question that they don't respond to the way you wanted them to, like figure out like how you hurt them and listen to that and apologize for it. And, and always thank people for their time at the end of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. And I think
can I add one more thing?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
If you have an opportunity to take an implicit bias training course or workshop, take it. It is so helpful in order to being able to lift up and prevent some harm to people. And also, just as a proactive measure, and also to be able to stand in those places that are uncomfortable. It helps teach you that, because also takes practice.
That is an excellent resource. And I know we'll send out, when we send out this recording, we'll send out some information on the implicit bias trainer that we have here at the James Beard Foundation, Didier Sylvan, who is incredible resource, wonderful man. And his voice is just like smooth like butter. You just want to do whatever he says and just you can hear criticism in a very, I will take that criticism and do my best with it. And I also, as we're talking about preparing and what it means to be a good interviewer, I want to give a shout out to Davida Davidson, who is on this call as an attendee. Davida doesn't know it, but she taught me an awful lot about how to prepare for interviewing as a moderator, and like having all of your notes ready and giving people the time to make sure that you know who you're talking to, where they came from, and you do them that respect. It's not enough to just ask questions. You want to really be invested in where these folks came from and who they are, and pay that respect to them, and So thank you, Davida. And if anybody has not gone to check out the Detroit Food Lab and you have the opportunity to look at their website, or you have an opportunity to follow Davida, it is just a master class in how to be an excellent human. So thank you, Davida, while you're out there. Hopefully we'll be able to have you on very soon to talk about what's going on in your piece of the world as well. Something that we are getting a question about here is we're talking a lot about the American experience, at least today, right now, and like, will the rural areas open, and will the Valley Register be the next hotspot for food journalism and whatnot? We have a question about what the palatability right now is for international stories. There's a food writer from South Africa on here who's saying, is it a good time to be pitching American outlets as to like how they're dealing with things in their country?
I mean, I can speak for,
okay, sure.
I can speak for, for Life and Time specifically, we've always been very interested and eager to have global perspective when it comes to food, because I think that we can only learn from one another, and it just widens anytime that we can share information, whether that's pure inspiration and escapism and something fun to inspire somebody to go travel, or these are farming practices in this part of the world that work really well and that we're not doing it here and maybe we can learn something. I think that there is always going to be global interest. That said, I'm speaking for one specific publication, but I think anytime you're pitching, trying to find out what that publication is looking for and what they typically run and what their mission is, you can tailor it. But, if you're looking to pitch global stories, call me.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'll say because we operate in a couple of modalities, because we are both, I work on both digital and print. Right now on digital, we're pretty much as we're very, very focused on impact of COVID-19 on some restaurants, some on home cooks and stuff. But I know we were actually specifically, I'm thinking about a Slack conversation the other day where we're mostly looking at places that have, or maybe on the other side of things right now, to see, so we can offer a blueprint right now to how are things going in some of the countries in Asia where maybe restaurants are starting to reopen some, and see what that looks like right now. So so that's the kind of thing. For print, I would say there is more leeway, and I think that people sort of pitching from non-US places are going to find a more receptive audience right now, because we can't travel. And we can't send, a staffer or somebody to, whatever country it happens to be. So I think you'll see print publications with a longer lead time be more and more reliant on people who actually live in those countries. I mean, I'm never a fan of parachute journalism, generally popping into a country. Hey, I know everything about your city or country or whatever right now because I spent a weekend there that was funded by the Tourism Bureau, whatever that is. But if you can approach a magazine and be like, hey, I actually have a great photographer lined up, and I have such whatever it is, it's generally pretty easy to find a print calendar for like what's upcoming. Like we're starting to look at 2021 right now. Like we're pretty much assigned through 2020 at this point. But if you can have that sort of crystal ball kind of thing and look ahead, you can be kind of a print magazine's best asset right now.
Yeah. And Jamila, I have a question for you about, we've talked about the effects of COVID on the front lines and on, in particular, communities of color. How do you see journalists as frontline workers trying to tell the stories of these communities, potentially endangering themselves, or how can they get their story heard?
Yeah, we are not only on the front lines, but we're also in it. We're covering the story, but we're living it too. Just to underscore something Kat said, a lot of us are facing layoffs, furloughs, You know, there are going to be publications that we just don't know how they will survive this, or sections of publications. On the front lines, you know, we have to be, you know, not only do we, you know, folks are putting their lives in danger. Where there are all kinds of regulations. You know, a lot of us are doing our reporting from home, but our photographers are out in the streets shooting everyone. I'm just going to shout out all of the photo staffs and video staffs who, you know, don't have the luxury of working from their kitchen bars or their sofas. But as we're covering communities of color, you know, that it also illuminates the challenge of not having diverse staffs and not having people who can go in and talk to those communities. You know, we had a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer who you know, was just going to Black funeral homes because those were the people who are you know, those are the folks who are dying. You know, you know, there's a huge disparity, and it starts to surface a lot of issues that we already know: food insecurity, food deserts, lack of health care, lack of resources, and it underscores why we have to have journalists of color, Black journalists, Latinx journalists, journalists who, you know, are non-cisgender, to be able to elevate those stories. And the journalists who are not part of those communities have to challenge themselves to stand in that space and listen to people, as Steph was saying, listen to folks who are saying, everybody who's Black in Detroit suddenly has bronchitis, and they're not being diagnosed with COVID-19. And why is it that, I mean, and what, you know, why is it that, you know, we're celebrating all of the folks who are, you know, doing delivery, but we're not looking at the zip codes and being sure that that delivery is not following the same patterns of redlining that we see in every other system. That our public transit, you know, when we're talking about, oh, here's the, you know, farmers market pickup, but people may not have cars and can only rely on public transportation. We have to look at the, you know, every piece of the food system, and as we're lauding things and change that, you know, restaurants are turning takeout and delivery, but also are there still people who are being left out of the change? As we go forward, we have to also look at that. We have to look at things like tipping, immigration status, all of these factors that are part of the entire landscape and how they impact our food system. You know, food is contributing to that in some way. Are we going to have equitable farming? Are we going to have equitable delivery? Are we going to have, you know, equitable payment systems? You know, will people who own restaurants be able to pay people a living wage? Those are all questions that we have to be asking as we're talking about, you know, whether or not restaurants are going to come back.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like restaurant and food journalism is going to be the best people to get to the bottom of what's going on right now, and also the folks who are going to have to hold everyone accountable as we continue to recover from this, to ensure that those grounds are covered. We're nearing the end of our time, so I wanted to just ask you all just a quick last question, maybe starting with Steph, because Steph is on this side of my screen, and we'll go this way. So where do you see the most opportunity for folks out there right now as it relates to the future of food journalism?
Well, I think in some ways, it's a very exciting time to be in food journalism because there are so many different avenues that you can pursue. And because there's such a diversity of publications, it's really important to find the audience that you want to speak to, and align yourself with a publication that reaches that audience. And that might be the, you know, sort of more kind of investigative reporting that Jamila is talking about, but it also might be, you know, home cooks. It might be, you know, there are a lot of different audiences in food, and I think you can really tap into whatever it is that you're looking to do. And I think we need all of it. I think one thing that's really going to come out of this, and I've had this conversation a lot with chefs over the last month, is sort of a return to more humble, more, you know, grounded conversations about food. One thing that is really clear in this crisis is that food isn't just a luxury. Food is a necessary thing that everyone needs access to. And whether that's teaching somebody at home how to make sourdough and be a little bit more self-sustainable, or really investigating those more pivotal topics, whether that's in communities or in the restaurant. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think you can kind of carve your own niche and find your own path, but it's really important to do the research and to follow your passion and what interests you. I think that's what makes your writing great, is when your passion comes through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kat, I personally am hoping that the future of food journalism includes you bringing back the no pressure cooking segment. We're all press potting and Instapotting at my house, and so I'm really hopeful that you bring that back. This is a personal plug. What do you think?
Oh my God, we need a sponsor for that. The thing is, it started at Extra Crispy, which RIP has been, gone for a long time now. And Food and Wine was, the day I found out I was coming over to Food and Wine, I was like, can we at least wrap up the saga of the love story between Instant Pot and the version of me that is on that? But if folks haven't seen it, it is all about cooking by yourself in quarantine when you might be being kept prisoner by a lustful Instant Pot. But I wanted to say to people who are listening to this, and maybe you're an existing journalist, maybe you're thinking about it. I didn't get started in this as a food journalist until I was 34, 35. So I was a career changer. I had been an art director, and I had, always been really nervous to call myself a writer. And I was just thinking, I didn't go to school for this. My background was all in, it was metalsmithing, it was art, it was all this stuff. And I always felt like these are, food writer, or these fancy people or whatever. And I had to kind of figure out what my road was, because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. And I just sort of stumbled through the back door, and I was able to just sort of figure out okay, well, what do I think I know that could be valuable to somebody else? And and try not to be embarrassed about the fact that I was getting a later start than a lot of people. And then I kept doing stuff that scared me. I went from AOL to CNN, and I was thinking Anderson Cooper is going to figure out I don't know what the hell I'm doing and kick me out of the building personally. But the thing is, each person who's listening to this has a skill or a frame of reference or something like that nobody else has. And you have to trust that thing, that point of view, that perspective, that, whatever it is that makes you special, and someone will value that. Doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter your level of education, where you come from. If you have a story in you, it's going to be worth telling, and it's a matter of seeking out the people who can help you tell that. But I don't want anybody to have to go through what I did, where they were ashamed or too embarrassed or whatever to call themselves a writer, a journalist, or whatever it is. Everybody is faking it till they make it, and they're still faking it after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also put into the chat for folks who may have missed it earlier, Kat is the founder of Chefs with Issues. If anybody's having a hard time, you just want to talk, it's an incredible resource, and you don't have to be a chef to participate. It's just, you could be anybody in the hospitality sector. And yeah, it's a great place, and it's I find it very useful to me to just sort of, even if you're just passively reading other folks' stories to help yourself not feel so alone, or if you want to share, it's an incredibly supportive place, and it's free. We love that.
Always will be.
Jamila, tell me what you think about the future of food journalism and how much time it's going to allow you to continue playing violin, or no more violin.
Well, my hope is that I can go back to the ice rink. I kind of didn't give up the violin completely. Well, no, that's not true. I gave up the violin to figure skate, and it is the thing that I really, really miss. And I'm jumping axles in my backyard, because that's how I live right now. But I want to say that if one thing this has shown us is that food writers are essential. That every publication, the publications that have invested in food writers, in food coverage more broadly, the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Philadelphia Inquirer, the New York Times. I'm throwing off a lot of big names here, but those that have invested are in better positions in order to cover this story, to cover the supply chain. We wouldn't know. We have such a depth of reporting at the Philadelphia Inquirer that we could talk about the seafood supply chain and its impact and be ahead of that story. The New York Times has tremendous amount of resources and a lot of reporters, but it is a lesson because there are so many publications who did not think that role was essential and thought that, you know, fancy people restaurants, and then not realizing that, wow, they're gentrified neighborhoods, you know, that price value has gone up because of the restaurants there, and all of those things are interconnected. So I think what I'm hoping will come out of this, that news organizations, media organizations across the board will look at their food systems and realizing that it is an essential role, and build a framework for investment around that so that we can continue to be prepared to feed people and tell stories about food. And the other thing that I hope comes out of this is that we see the importance of having diverse voices. I'm excited that it's actually opened up an opportunity for me to commission essays from all kinds of people. And so instead of that voice on high food writer, that we actually function as a community, and that everybody's voices are valuable and valued and visible. So I'm hoping that those will all be things that news organizations will look at and see that, you know, food writing, food journalism, it's an essential role. It is essential to your media organization. It's essential to community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's how we're going to be telling the story of life through food. And so it sounds like we have a bright future ahead. Hopefully there's more room for more folks within the industry to be heard, like you said. We had another question that came through, which was, how can I connect with y'all? And that's why we've left everybody's Instagram handles up. Just slide in those DMs or send us an email, or, you know, let us know, what is your story? What's happening in your world? People are open and receptive to that. And as you can tell, like, I fangirl over all of these women, and they said yes to coming on my webinar today. So if you ask, people are willing to jump in there and help. People are a lot less intimidating than you think. And if you really genuinely want to hear their stories, they're going to want to connect with you, and they're going to want to have, you know, that mutual community with you. So I want to close by just adding that the jamesbeard.org/release site is where you'll be able to find the recording of this webinar and all the ones we've done in the past. You'll also be able to find out what we have coming up. If you have an idea for a topic that's not being covered that you think needs a voice, you can email us at impact@jamesbeard.org. And we just are so grateful to Jamila and Kat and Stef for giving us the time from your homes today to share all of these resources with us, share your stories with us. And we wish you absolutely well, and everyone who showed up today, thank you for taking this hour to hopefully get your mind off things a little bit, learn a little something. And we hope we'll see you again very soon. So thank you all. And I don't know if it's raining where everybody else is, but it's like apocalyptic here. So we're gonna get out of here. It's crazy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you
week.
so much for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye.